Hi, everyone. My name is Chris from National Parents Organization, and today I'm here with Amanda Sharples, and she wrote a paper on parental alienation that we're going to talk about. It's a really interesting paper. There's some very good findings in here, and I think you're going to want to learn that information. So, Amanda, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us, how did you get interested in this topic, and what experience do you have? I know one of the people you wrote the paper with was Dr. Harmon, and we've had her on before, and she's brilliant, and I know that you've got a good pedigree with this paper. So tell us, how did you get interested in parental alienation?
So I didn't know a lot about parental alienation probably till about 6 years ago. I had seen it happening to somebody I knew, or at least something odd was happening in their kind of dynamic with their children following separation. And I also have gone through a separation. I have a child that I co-parent with his father, and so I did a lot of research around that time too to try to think about what would be best for my child following our separation. Um, and as I learned about parental alienation at that time, there wasn't a lot out there. I did come across Dr. Harmon's paper, the 2018 one specifically, looking at conceptualizing parental alienation as a form of family violence that she wrote with Edward Kruk and Denise Hines. And I thought it was a brilliant paper. It made so much sense to me that this was another form of family violence. I had joined some support groups and kind of followed people on social media that talked about their own experiences um, being alienated from their children. And I had noticed quite a few people talking about abuse in their relationships, abuse towards their children. And I thought that this was an area of research that needed more attention. I did reach out to Dr. Harmon, expressed my interest in the work she was doing, and she told me about some of the data that her and Dr. Lorendos had collected, the Appellate cases from the United States. That would potentially allow us to look at some of these things. They had information about abuse claims, other abuse claims in these cases. So that's where it all started.
So take us through. I know you went through with this paper and did a lot of research and looked at a lot of actual cases, but in general, I think the claim is that somebody will claim parental alienation, and then the courts don't know if it's true or false. They don't know quite what to do with it, and your paper is here to study and say, kind of the trend, right? Is somebody if somebody is claiming parental alienation, are they are abuser or not? Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, I mean, the goal was to really just see what was happening, like what was the pattern in these cases. It's challenging to collect data on this topic because a lot of it's secondhand, it's archival data we're working with. It's not the kind of thing you can really experimentally test in a lab. So we're doing the best with the information that's publicly available. I mean, we can ask people about their experiences too, and there's a lot of great work that they're doing, interviewing parents that have experienced alienation. But yeah, what we wanted to do is see what is the actual pattern here. There seems to be this point of contention out there amongst people studying PA, as well as people that are very much against parental alienation as a concept. Um, and it seems to be that the argument is about who is the abuser, right? Is it the person that is using these parental alienating behaviors, or is parental alienation just this false claim? And of course, both these things can happen, but we wanted to see like what's really happening in the courts. They had found in their original paper, Dr. Harmon and Lorendos, that um, that wasn't what was happening. Like courts weren't just handing children over to parents with substantiated allegations of abuse. And what we found, which was, I think, important, was that not only were they not doing that, but the parents that had substantiated allegations of abuse were also more likely to be found to be alienating parents, and not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise there. Those of us that have been kind of in this movement for a while, I think that's generally what we've been saying. But now we've got some proof to back it up. And you didn't just look at a few cases. I was reading through. It looked like you had looked over 1,000 cases.
Originally, there were over 1,000 cases. We focused on cases where there were founded allegations of parental alienation, so it ended up being just under 500 cases. So,
Yeah,
which is still a decent sample. Yes, definitely.
yeah, 500 cases. That's a lot of samples. I mean, for the viewers out there, for something to be statistically significant, you don't generally want to get more than a few samples. But certainly 500 is enough to build some strong data on. And was there any results that you were sort of surprised about?
I don't know that the results themselves surprised me. I guess perhaps like how the size of the effect was maybe stronger than I was anticipating. Um, we did look at other things that we like. It's all kind of on the Open Science Framework page for anyone that wants to see it. It's just unfortunately we with the publications you can only talk about so much. And so in some of our hypotheses were like that we had other things we were interested in weren't supported. We didn't see gender differences in who was having their claims substantiated. Um, so, we had thought maybe that mothers would be more likely to have claims of abuse, other claims of abuse substantiated. And I don't know, like, that that's necessarily surprising. I mean, I think it's good that we aren't seeing a lot of these gender differences. It just suggests, provides support for what we've been saying, that this is something that happens to men and women, and it doesn't have to be a gendered issue. I understand how gender roles come into play, but yeah, I don't think that what we found was surprising. I was just kind of surprised at how clear it was.
So, what does this mean for courts, and how can courts or professionals like legal professionals use the information that you found in your study? How can it help them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think there's still a lot of research that we have to do. But as I was saying, it's so challenging to study these things. I don't think that this is would be all that surprising to courts. I mean, this is going off of our court records, right? So I think that it just suggests we need to put more effort into identifying legitimate claims of abuse early on and legitimate claims of alienation, and actually really instead of trying to throw away the concept of alienation, like understand how it relates to and it becomes part of this uh, the system of coercively controlling abusive behavior, and identify those behaviors. Like, what are the things that parents are doing very early on in these court proceedings that allow that alienation to happen? Because once it gets to a certain point, it becomes extremely challenging to treat that and to deal with it in the family system.
Can you talk a little bit about the sort of relationship or maybe the differences between parental alienation and IPV, this interpartner violence? What did you find out with the study, and how do those two relate?
Yeah, so we did run our original analysis was looking at all forms of abuse. So we coded abuse as child physical abuse, child emotional abuse, child sexual abuse, and then we had domestic violence, which referred more to intimate partner violence. Um, and that was our original analysis. We ran a separate one just looking at domestic abuse claims to kind of see whether this was really part of a pattern of domestic violence. And we found that our results were still supported there. Um, I don't, I mean, so we need to do more research. We have more detailed information now. There are some Canadian court records, again, that were collected in some work by Dr. Harmon and Dr. Lorendos and other colleagues they were working with. I believe they're publishing some of that, and I'm hoping to try to replicate these findings. But we do have more detailed information about the kind of parental alienating behaviors that were specifically being used in these cases. And so I think it's important to look at how these different categories of behaviors maybe map onto other forms of abuse. I don't know exactly what I would expect there, but yeah, I think that would be an important next step.
What did you find in the way of false abuse? Because a lot of times we hear about in shared parenting cases, there's lots of claims of false abuse or false allegations, at least. What did you find there?
Yes, so we did find, so when we did our coding, we coded our claims as substantiated, unsubstantiated, or unclear. And many of our claims were just unclear. There just wasn't enough information. For something to be unsubstantiated, it had to be noted by the courts that there wasn't there wasn't weight to the claim. Now that could mean that it was a false claim. It could mean there wasn't enough evidence. Again, it's hard with the information we have. But it was, again, it supported our hypothesis that these false claims of abuse seem to be this legal and administrative aggression tactic that's used by the alienating parents. It's the alienating parents that are significantly more likely to make unsubstantiated claims of abuse in these cases. And again, like I can kind of, having looked at some of the cases in more detail, I couldn't do this with every case, so this is more anecdotal. It was interesting, in some of these cases where a parent had a substantiated allegation of abuse against them, but was claiming that they were being alienated. Often, when you looked at the behaviors that were being described, like they were the ones that were actually using alienating behaviors too. So I do think sometimes there are these false claims of alienation where that parent's actually projecting their own alienating behaviors. It's just not effective. Um, and so it's backfiring in those cases. So I think more work exploring that question is important as well.
When you studied the data, were you able to tell, maybe how courts handled these claims, and was there a variance in how the courts handled these, maybe from jurisdiction to jurisdiction or maybe over time?
So I didn't look at differences across jurisdictions or over time and how they were handling them. And again, I'd have to go back to the data file. I don't know like how much detail we had on all of that. I don't know if some of that might have been covered in the original paper as well by Dr. Harmon and Dr. Lorendos. But they they were very careful. What I can say and what we were looking at with the abuse claims, we did have information about what parties were involved in investigating these claims. And in many cases, if not most of them, there were multiple parties involved. It wasn't just a parent going in. I mean, of course, that happens sometimes, and making a claim. Often these were taken quite seriously, and Child Protective Services, psychologists, therapists, as well as the courts would be involved in investigating these claims and interviewing the children and trying to figure out what was happening.
Yeah, certainly a lot of effort goes into these things. Some of these cases can get quite complicated. Did you find out anything that you really thought should be handled differently by the courts? Is there a big gap of how the courts are handling these cases?
It's a tricky thing. I don't know that through the research I necessarily found anything. I mean, I think it was encouraging to see across both this study and the original study that Harmon and Lorendos published that they aren't they are carefully investigating these claims, and they aren't just making reversing custody and having children go with parents that have substantiated allegations of abuse. I think it's just a very challenging situation in general. There needs to be more education on what parental alienation is and how it relates to other forms of abuse, and again, identifying it early on. Um, but that is going to vary quite a bit across cases because there's so many other factors that come into play when we're dealing with families and family systems and different jurisdictions, different laws, and different approaches to how they handle family court cases to begin with. But what was the other point I wanted to make there? I forget now. One thing that I thought was interesting, this is other research that's been done. Again, Dr. Lorendos, I cite some of this in the discussion. They do find that there's actually considerable agreement among most professionals working in family court with respect to what parental alienation is. So that's encouraging. I think we're heading in the right direction. Also, there was a review, I think, published just last year by Dr. Harmon and colleagues in the Journal of Developmental Psychology, where they found that there have been a substantial number of studies conducted, again, over the last 5, 6 years. I think they looked at like 213 in their review. So there's a lot of empirical attention and a lot of awareness. I just think that it's unfortunate that there's still so much contention surrounding the concept that can muddy the waters a bit and make it hard to really draw awareness to it. Because I think at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. We don't want to see children in abusive situations. We don't want to see children traumatized by their parents' separation. We don't want children not being left unprotected, and nor do we want victims of intimate partner violence being left unprotected. It's just it's really challenging when you're in this kind of dynamic where there's a very specific power balance that goes on in these family court situations. And I like to believe the best in people, and it really saddens me that these false claims are maybe occurring in family court. I don't think that is maybe common outside of that domain, but it's unfortunate that that's become a tactic that's used to get a certain to get an upper hand in some of these cases. And unfortunately, you're dealing in these situations with especially severe alienating situations with parents that have some sort of underlying mental health issue. And even, yes, in less severe cases, you may be able to tell them, hey, this is what you're doing, this is harmful to your child, and then hopefully get some sort of mediation counseling to prevent it getting any worse. But when these cases become particularly severe, that doesn't seem to work.
I'm curious, did you see any correlation between, maybe the severity of the cases and the benefits that the parents stand to gain, by sort of winning one side or the other? Was there any sort of, I know you were looking at old cases in some respects, and that may be difficult, but did you see any patterns? Maybe parents were being incentivized to have these behaviors and inflict as much pain on the other party?
I don't know that our data can speak to that. Again, there weren't a lot of substantiated allegations, and when there were false claims, I don't know that that was giving parents the upper hand in these cases, but it definitely probably made the process more challenging for everyone involved. I I mean, what we didn't find again that uh, I didn't really see anything that suggested in this data set that parents are getting the upper hand. But I think that if you're making false claims, it can delay things, and probably make it more challenging in a custody situation for a parent that is a good fit, normal range, healthy parent to have the parenting time that they might want. But I don't know that our data can speak to that directly. I'd have to go and look at some of our other alternative hypotheses. But I believe all we found, because we did think that it may be the case that fathers were more likely to lose custody even when false claims were made. And we didn't find that. We did find that the most likely reason a person would lose custody, which, as you might expect, was because there was a substantiated allegation of abuse against that person, or would lose parenting time specifically.
And I want to talk a little bit about the definition of parental alienation, because that's really important to this study, I think, is how you define it. We have the 5-factor model from Dr. Bernay. And how did you define parental alienation for the purpose of the study?
So yes, we couldn't really define it. We just went off of the courts again, if they made a finding of alienation or not. That's a limitation of our study. But definitely the 5-factor model, I think, is a very important step in the right direction. I briefly mentioned that at the end of the paper, that hopefully, again, I think it's important to remember that people that are studying parental alienation, those of us that really care about this issue, we fully recognize that there are protective parents out there. And the first and most important thing to identify is that the child had a pre-existing healthy, non-abusive relationship with this parent that was interfered with. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a really important step in the right direction. But yes, outside of like, all we really had was information about whether the courts made a finding of parental alienation or not. I may have more information with some of the Canadian data to look at that, like how they were making their decisions.
Do you have any other topics you want to talk about?
I mean, not off the top of my head. I hope I appreciate you again having me on the your channel to talk a bit about this. I hope this work is a step in the right direction. Again, I hope we can kind of get to a point where we all recognize the importance of protecting children and victims of intimate partner violence in these situations, and see how this is a pattern of coercively controlling abusive behavior. And again, we do, as you know from having talked to many experts on this issue, care very much about accurately identifying alienation. Of course, there's false allegations, and I think understanding what those look like is important too, and understanding how the courts handle false allegations. Again, it doesn't seem like they're just taking everybody's word for it. There's a lot of careful work that's done, but it's really challenging in these situations. And I think it's a really important to again identify these behaviors very early, with what might be happening early on, because treatment becomes really challenging, and we know that the long-term effects on children and the way this continues to pervade the family system in the future, like this is it's a very important problem.
Amanda, tell us, how can people get the paper and how can they contact you if they want to?
Yeah, so the paper is not open source, and that's just because of the way publication works. Everything is through subscription, unless you have to pay quite a bit to make things open source, which I know some of the researchers have done to get this information out to the public. People can contact me if they want more information about the paper. We do have like the abstract up on ResearchGate, but my email address is just amanda.sharples@utoronto.ca. So you can find that on the paper contact info as well. And if anyone has any other questions about the research or future research that we're doing, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on. And I guess the last question I have is, what's next for you? Do you have some more exciting research coming up for us?
I hope so. I'm working with students. I'm a teaching focused faculty member. So again, I do this research because I am passionate about the topic, and it's touched me personally in a few ways, actually. I've learned more about how it's affected my own family, as I've learned about what this is. And we're trying to do some work better measuring these behaviors that parents are using and how children perceive them and how it relates to different outcomes. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of that out there in the future. And again, replicating some of these findings with the Canadian data and being able to look at things in a bit more detail, because we have more information about how courts are making these decisions and the specific kind of alienating behaviors parents seem to be using.
Well, fantastic. And we really appreciate you coming on, and we will get this out for you. And we'll have links to everything in the show notes. And so if anybody wants to go read the abstract on ResearchGate or download it if you have access, and we'll also put your contact information. Thanks so much for coming on, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you having me. And yeah, I'm happy to chat again in the future.